Hello, I'm Colin Green, and you are listening to Spike Pit. So I've got to tell you guys, this is only tangentially related to RPGs, but I've got to tell you, because I had a great day recently visiting a school for kids with social, emotional and mental health needs that cannot be met in a mainstream school. I didn't know really what to expect from this school, but what an experience it was. I met such a great bunch of teachers and teaching assistants and support staff doing an awesome job. It's quite encouraging to find out where the children that don't find a place in mainstream, the fortunate ones that don't find a place in mainstream, where they go, what the provision for those kids is. And I tell you what, I was blown away. I spent a day there. First thing we did was a class. So in the design and technology department, the first class I was in had 2 kids. There was scheduled to be 3, and we were making Lego balloon cars, looking at kind of good and bad design, and we made some Lego balloon cars. Up on the wall of the workshop, we've got A-Wings, Millennium Falcon, X-Wings. I don't know, I was in my element. I couldn't believe it. First lesson and we're playing Lego, and the kids were amazing. Most of them have got some kind of they're mostly autistic. You've got quite a lot of ADHD, all sorts of stuff. A lot of them come from really challenging backgrounds, difficult home lives, and they travel in from far and wide to come to this school. The teacher I was working with has made some major improvements to his department, like for example introducing Lego. The guy running it has got a £200 a month comic addiction, and one of the highlights of the day was at 3 o'clock. It's enrichment time. The kids have a lot of flexibility throughout the day, but there's not many places where I can openly discuss Dungeons and Dragons and RPGs without feeling some kind of stigma or feeling a little bit awkward. I don't know if this dates back to like victimisation that players experience, like myself back in the day, back in the 80s. It's probably different for youngsters now getting into the game, but it's really difficult to shake that off. But in this location, I just felt at home and that I could talk about this stuff. And when I heard that there was a nerd club or something like that, I forget what it's called, but basically at 3 o'clock all these kids get to do what they want, and I heard that they played D&D, and there was this room where all the kids that was into that kind of RPG thing, Warhammer Games Workshop, all that type of stuff, all gathered in this room. I thought, yeah, sign me up, I want to see this. And thankfully the guy showing me around, a gentleman called Dave, he took me along, and oh wow, it was like if you took about 5 Games Workshop stores, piled them into one room, turn the volume up to 11 on your amp. That was what it was like, super high octane. There was an older gentleman, he was the DM, basically jumping around a room. Maybe I think it was 8 kids, super animated, getting into their D&D, like shouting out what they wanted to do, having a whale of a time, whilst myself and another tutor from the school, we were just reminiscing about first edition Warhammer, heading up to the show at Newark, where he still gets to meet all the luminaries of Games Workshop back in the day, the likes of Rick Priestley, Brian Ansell, the Perry twins, Kev Goblin Adams, and we were just chatting about the old days, Hero Quest, Dungeon Quest, all the old games, Traveller. These days don't happen very often for me, and when they do, I just feel like I've got a wax lyrical, absolute blast, totally in my element. There was miniature paints everywhere, games everywhere, absolute joy to behold. If you could catch lightning in a bottle, that would be a sight for doing it, man. Awesome day, and I just want to share that with you guys. Now, for a fella who reckons he's got a bad memory, I think old Jason of Nerds RPG Variety Cast does a pretty good job of remembering things. This example of his memory stretches back, I don't know, probably 3, maybe 4 years, and it's just something I've mentioned on a podcast, and how many of those do you think he listens to? So this is an example of a feat of memory from the man himself, and if you are of a sensitive nature, you might want to be warned. He's sounding like he's in a good deal of pain, and it's quite some effort for him to talk. I tried my best to help him out, get him to rest his voice, but his sense of loyalty to the show, overcoming, and thankfully he's called in anyway, but it is a bit painful to listen to, unfortunately. Thankfully, he's on the med now. Recently just dropped a new episode, so go and give that a listen.
Hey Colin, Jason here. If this isn't usable, I understand. The first time I heard of Beyond the Wall, and when I bought it, was when you talked about it on an old episode that, due to reasons that you're aware of, isn't available anymore. But yeah, so I found it interesting. I guess that's the other problem with things like the lack of a back catalog, is you get like Arlen calling in explaining Beyond the Wall to you when you're the person that introduced it to the Anchorsphere, as far as I know. But the good thing is Arlen did a really good job of hitting the high points, and so hopefully anybody heard your episode, he did a good job selling it, so hopefully they'll go check it out, because it is a good game.
Yeah, it is funny. Whilst I don't claim to have discovered anything or be really very much ahead of the curve at all, I did chuckle when Arlen called that into me, and even that calling was a little while ago. I've recently, nudged a little bit by Jason, to be fair. I've started delving into the back catalogue again, maybe trying to find some of the best of. It's just so labour intensive to try and tidy it up, which is what I'd really like to do. I listen to the old episodes and they make me cringe, but one thing I do like to do is, if I've got a particularly good call in, and that one from Arlen is a great example, that they don't really age, and they can be really useful if you want to revisit a subject. And 4 years in, it's almost a little bit of nostalgia for me, especially when I got call-ins from people that are maybe not podcasting anymore, or they've just gone a bit quiet. It's nice to hear those old voices, so I'll probably put them out every now and then. The problem is it can tend to confuse people. The other thing I've been doing is changing the way I title my episodes. Now, I've gone through various changes over the years. This time, currently, I'm just trying to get some idea of the content in the title. So if I'm looking back at episodes, they're a little bit easier to identify and perhaps point people to, or just find stuff, maybe help people out to select what they want to listen to, because you don't always want to read the show notes, and I don't always write the show notes. I don't know, it's not a very precise science, but thanks for the call in, Jason. And talking about Beyond the Wall, big fan of the moment, introduced to Beyond the Wall by Spencer. It's Joe from Hindsightless with some very valid thoughts. So let's hear what he's got to say, and I'll come back with some commentary after we've listened to Joe.
Hey, Spike Pit, just listening to your latest episode, you're talking about whether or not it'd be a good idea to start an RPG club on your first full year of being a teacher. I might have more thoughts on that later because I put in a call to my mom, a longtime retired teacher, and I'm going to ask her what she thinks. Not that that really matters, but I'm doing it anyway. Also, man, you mentioned how in that club you might be running my RPG crush, Beyond the Wall, my current RPG crush at least. And yeah, man, I don't think you necessarily have to play that game as kids, like little kids. I picture them more as like older teens, right? Like 16 to 19, basically. And it's sort of, the game kind of explains why these people have become first level characters. And that's one of the things I love about it. But I don't think about it like Kids on Bikes where they're all little kids. But hold on, I got to come back for second round.
Ding ding, and I'm butting in there. Well, thanks very much for thinking of me, Joe, and calling in. I look forward to hearing what your mum has to say. I always like to hear from veteran teachers, and their words of wisdom have served me well so far in my training, and I've got no reason to doubt that being any different heading into the future. And of course, Joe makes an excellent point about Beyond the Wall. I said kids. I think I was thinking in my mind around 15, 16, but you're definitely right. They could be, I reckon, almost anything under 21 or 20, something like that. And you know, in those kind of like adventure fantasy and in the fiction, these kids, by the time they're 15 and 16, they are really quite competent. I would be doubtful about how competent some of the 15 and 16-year-olds in my family would be, left to their own devices and going off out in the world. But of course, this we're talking fantasy, and I may be doing the youngsters a discredit. And it's a very different world, of course. They're shrewd in their own ways, and many of them have got skills that put me to shame, especially when it comes to your devices and your computers and all the things that they grow up with nowadays. Yeah, it is excellent in terms of the materials. I was reading it again the other day, the playbooks, and the fact the author talks about how the game has been designed as something you can just like throw down and get on with a minimum of prep. Yeah, so I think we're going to be talking about this for a little while, and I'm really keen to hear what you do with it, Joe. It's your crush, your RPG crush at the minute, and you know, as is the way of the Anchorsphere, I think the whole thing is greater than the sum of its parts. So perhaps we can get our heads together and our voices unite across the airwaves and make wonderful music together, Joe. Wonderful music.
Okay, so you mentioned how a kid in your robotics club asked you if you liked Lord of the Rings, and that got me thinking. I was like, well, Spike Pit's talking about starting an RPG club and wondering what game to play. This kid asked if he likes Lord of the Rings. What about MERP? Those tables, those critical tables. Kids love those tables, man. I grew up on MERP. It bred in me a lifelong love of gaming. I just thought it was the coolest game. Yeah, man, MERP. No, I know that's probably too much, but maybe, like the One Ring or something. I don't know. Kids love Lord of the Rings, so that might be a cool thing. I'm just riffing. Anyway, man, I'll let you go. Peace out.
Now, I don't mean to throw any shade on Joe's first RPG love. I remember MERP when it came out, but at the moment, whew, I can't take on another game, especially not the likes of MERP. It's quite involved, I realise. Menion recently, I remember him talking about playing it. My brother was my brother playing in that game, and Jason Connnerly was playing in it, and yeah, Tolkien wise, I'd probably run there and back again and do a hobbity thing, or if I was willing to do another 5e game, I've got all the adventures in Middle Earth stuff, so it's that procrastination phase. Awesome stuff, Joe, and yeah, man, I did love the look of the MERP stuff. Some awesome artwork in there. A couple of episodes ago, I was talking about J.G. Ballard's High Rise, a novel, a dystopian novel. I finished reading it now. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's not pleasant. It's not all sweetness and light, as you'd expect from a dystopian novel, but the idea of a high rise as an RPG setting with these layers, I've talked about it time and time again. I know my buddy Spencer, aka Free For All, he is also a fan of this type of thing, and probably, to be fair, Barney, Loco Ludus, we've talked about it numerous times. Rich pickings there, and apparently I've discovered that Barney is in fact looking at some J.G. Ballard stuff, and I did know the name of the book and it's totally escaped me, but it's not important. I think I will be reading some more of this author's work, but just not at a minute. I've got the whole kids gaming thing going on. I've got to brush up on some RPGs, so yeah, it's curtailed my reading of novels for now.
As far as high rises go, I don't know if you're aware, they did make High Rise into a movie with some of their top stars in it. People like Tom Hiddleston and some of these other big name stars are in that movie. But there are other movies I think of when I think of high rises that aren't necessarily family fare. Things like David Cronenberg's Shivers from 1974, about a high rise that ends up being ground zero for a parasitic outbreak, and this infection causes people into fits of violence and sexual deviancy. There's also, of course, Demons 2 by it's by Roberto Bava, Mario Bava's son, where you, of course, have an outbreak of demons in a high-rise. I guess other high-rise movies out there that, people would think of. Recently, there have been quite a few, right? We've had The Raid, which is well worth checking out. Dread, which came out around the same time. They were developed separately, but both Dread, which is a Judge Dredd movie, and The Raid are excellent movies in their own accord. And Attack the Block is another movie that I would recommend. That's a good science fiction film, horror film, based in a high rise. So anyway, those are the things I think of when I think of high rise. So I just wanted to share that. I hope you're doing well, and hopefully when I recover, my fever still isn't broken, but when I recover, I'll be able to start putting out my own boxing videos. I look forward to it.
Thanks for the recommendations, Jason. When I get a second, I'd like to check out some of those. Might be a little bit tricky in a house full of kids, but we do get the odd quieter time. Also, thanks for that sterling effort, and thanks to both you and Joe, old buddies of some years, and constant and loyal supporters on the Patreon, the pit crew, heading up the pit crew, both Joe and Jason, all the J's. Thanks guys, and thanks to everybody else in the pit crew that are supporting me. Every shilling counting at the moment. I've only got to make it through a few more weeks and I'll be back on a salary, so hopefully I won't have to go setting any rat traps or anything like that. So we're not quite at a dystopian stage yet, folks.